Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk4787. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we've got Punk4786. He's a Atty with clown green hair and charming buck teeth. He's one of the most OG of OG punks, having claimed a bag of 104 punks back in June 2017. He's deeply respected by the punk community and has been absolutely pivotal in moving the NFT space forward. Currently, he is a member in well-known DAOs such as MeBits DAO, Neon DAO, and Ready Player DAO, and also advisor to the NFT project, the Ethereans. Please welcome Non-Fungible Tony, or Mr. Tony Hererra, to the show.
Hey Tony, good morning, how are you? Or good evening, I should say.
Yes, good evening. It's evening here where I'm at. Yes, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Mate, so let's maybe get into it a little bit, but you're, just so we're on the same page as well. So I think we were just talking before the call. I think briefly bumped into you at the MeBits brunch, and only briefly because I think you were super popular there. But so where are you sort of based now these days?
I'm based in Southern California. I'm in LA. I've pretty much grew up in LA, and I've been here most of my life. We did bump in to each other briefly at the MeBits DAO brunch, which was really nice. And yeah, it was a whirlwind of activity there at NFC NYC, like it usually is. So
maybe Tony, if we can just start off really simply, but maybe just a brief introduction to you and your background, and I guess how you found your way into the beautiful world of NFTs.
Sure. So I've lived and worked in Southern California for most of my life. I'm originally from Mexico, came here as a child, was brought here by my parents as a child, grew up in Southern California, got here at a very young age. I was around 7-8 years old when I turned 8 here in the States, and attended school here in Southern California, and pretty much had that immigrant experience of growing up as an immigrant child, going to school, and then I was kind of like the oldest. I am the oldest of the family, the sibling. I have some brothers and sisters, one brother and 4 sisters, and since I was the oldest in the family, I was sort of like the individual that the community. We grew up in a small immigrant community. A lot of the people in our neighborhood were recently arrived immigrants, predominantly from Mexico. A lot of them friends and family that we knew. And so I became sort of like the kid that those families would seek out if they had to go to a doctor's appointment or a meeting with an attorney or had some sort of meeting. I became like the neighborhood interpreter. It's like I would go, and then I was like a young child. I was like maybe, 9. I can remember like beginning mostly around the time that I started kind of like getting the command of the English language. Probably around 10 or 11. Because, as a child, you pretty much pick up languages pretty quickly. So I picked up English pretty quickly, and then, sort of like would go, and oftentimes I'd go and just, people would give me a few bucks to go with them. So it kind of became a fun thing to do, right? Because you would go and you'd end up making a little bit of money oftentimes, and so I became like the family, the neighborhood interpreter. And then when I went through school and, I would get summer jobs, and then got all the way through high school, and then I didn't want to go to college. So I joined the military. I became a United States Marine, and through becoming a United States Marine, I got a little chance to travel. I ended up being stationed in Japan, which I loved. and so it kind of like opened my eyes to a little bit more of the other world. And so I came back after, I spent, at that time, I spent 3 years in the military. And then I got out, and and I had done well in the military. I had gotten several military promotions, and they wanted me to stay, but I couldn't see myself doing a 20-year stint in the Marine Corps, in the military, to get retirement. At the age of 19, 20, you think that 20 years is like a really long time. so I'm like, no, there's no way I'm staying in for 20 years. So I ended up coming back to Southern California. Still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so then I just started, basically, I got a part-time job at a retail department store, and I was going to community college. And when I was going to community college, I stumbled upon an ad for a job that I did for many, many decades, which is kind of like they're called vocational counselors. They actually started as a kind of job placement, where basically you were helping individuals find new jobs. So it was kind of like a job placement coordinator kind of thing. And through that job, I ended up working predominantly in the immigrant community, and later on, predominantly in the undocumented immigrant community. Sometimes people refer to them as illegal aliens, but I like to refer to them as undocumented immigrants, mostly because there's no such thing as an human being. So for me, it's the precise language is undocumented immigrants. So I've worked with the undocumented immigrant population for many, many decades. And one of the things that a lot of the immigrants would do is they would be involved in basically sending money back home, whether it be Mexico or South America, Central America predominantly. And through that, I became interested in how they were sending money. At that time, a lot of the money was being sent through predominantly Western Union and remittance companies like MoneyGram and other ones. And there's a couple other that come to mind. But at the time, I was working with a couple clients that had received some funds that they wanted to send back to Mexico. A lot of them were just going back to Mexico. They had worked here for many years and just decided they were going to go back and live out the remainder of their years in Mexico. And I had one particular client who wanted to send a large sum of money. He wanted to take a large sum of money. So I think at that time it was like a lot of money. It was like over $100,000. So for me, it was like a lot of money, and there was a risk in him taking it through, just on his person. It was very dangerous. So I said to him, "Look, let me see if we can figure something out. I think there might be a couple of other ways for you to do it." And at the time, by this time, Bitcoin had already come out, and I was kind of like trying to look into Bitcoin because one of the premises of Bitcoin was that it was remittances, borderless money, and permissionless money, and so I sort of dove into it. It didn't work out in the end because obviously you can send Bitcoin very easily, but converting it to the local currency is a bit more of a challenge. So I ended up in that process of helping this particular client in terms of like a solution for remittances. That's what led me down the rabbit hole of predominantly Bitcoin. Started buying Bitcoin early on in 2016, 2017, and then pretty much discovered Ethereum, and started buying Ethereum mostly for the participation in the ICOs. In 2017, there was the ICO craze, so you needed either Bitcoin or Ethereum in order to send that to the smart contract. Just to participate in ICOs, you needed that currency or those whether it be Bitcoin or Ethereum. And so I sort of like started diving, spending lots of hours, particularly enamored with Ethereum and this whole smart contract process. So I kind of dove in there, and through the ICO, rode the wave for the ICO craze, and then somehow discovered a Mashable article on the CryptoPunks, and by that time CryptoKitties had come out. So I was kind of like dabbling with. I not only had been lucky enough to claim CryptoPunks, but then also minted some CryptoKitties, bred some CryptoKitties, and just kind of like started getting into the aspect of NFTs, essentially before they were called NFTs. This is at that time they were just tokens on the Ethereum blockchain.
Wow. Is an amazing sort of backstory you have there, Tony. And I can relate to a few elements of it personally. My family is from Vietnam, Vietnamese immigrants as well. So I understand, that whole coming to a new country, English speaking country, and you're almost like the designated interpreter, and the help that you needed to be. But also coming from a large family, and I think the third part was really around your service in the Marines. I was in the Australian Army Reserve as well, but just out of curiosity, I mean, why did you decide to enlist in the Marines?
So I decided to enlist in the Marines because a friend of mine, at that time, a friend of mine, high school, elementary, junior high school, middle school friend of mine, it was kind of a thing where he's like, his name was Manny, and he's like, Manny's like, hey, Tony, what are you going to do? We're going to be graduating in a couple months, and what's your plan? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I might enroll in community college, or I'm not sure. And at the time, he mentioned that he had, was considering joining the Marines, and it was just sort of like on a whim. I went in and tested, because they make you take this thing called an ASVAB. At the time, I think it's still called the ASVAB. So it's a battery of tests that they give you, and it ended up that I scored well, and so then they were like, "Oh, well, you can pretty much pick whatever you want." And so I'm like, "All right, well, what's the cushiest job that you could do?" And they're like, "Well, that would probably be like something like around administration, where like you work in the office." I'm like, "All right, fine, I'll take that, right?" And so that's how I ended up it was sort of like just easy. It was like I went in on a weekend and tested, and I did, honestly, when I look back at it, it wasn't like there was like a whole lot of thought to it. It was sort of like, I knew I didn't want to go to college. I didn't, I hadn't like applied myself very much. So it wasn't like I didn't even apply. Not only had I not applied myself in school, because I could pretty much like kind of just would show up and, take the test, rarely studied for anything. So I wasn't like your typical, it was just sort of like, I had just like done the basics to get to school. And so, and even the whole military thing was sort of like, well, I need to do something. I can't be at home. So it was kind of like one of those things. And the fact that I was able to join at the time. Now you have a minimum 4-year contract, and at the time you could still do 3-year contracts. So I was like, it's 3 years. It's not that bad. I could go in, and that was it. It was like sort of like it wasn't. I can't say that. One, we didn't have any. I didn't have any members of the family as an immigrant child. I had nobody that ever had served in the military, so. It wasn't like I could say, my aunts or my uncles or my brothers or my father or something like that. It was just a total like on a kind of like a whim that I'm like, I went in and the fact that I scored well in the test made it sort of like, okay, cool, let's do this, and ended up doing it. And for the most part, I actually really enjoyed the military. A lot of the military is kind of like, a lot of people don't speak highly of it, especially if people who. It depends on who they are, but for me, at the time I served, it wasn't like the military. Wasn't. It was like mostly just not a lot of thought into going into it. But for me, the end result was that it was actually really a positive experience for me. I really enjoyed the time in the military, but I just couldn't see myself making a career out of it. It was just, to me, it was like, and I think mostly at that age, you're thinking 20 years is just a long time because they offered me like all sorts of other benefits to stay. Like I was offered, just a bunch of stuff, including officer candidate school, and then they're like, we'll send you to a prep school, and then you can then go on and become an officer once you complete college. And I was like, okay, well, what's it going to take? Well, they're like, well, it's going to be 2 years of prep school, and then you have 4 years of college, and then you have a commitment to the military for next year. And I did the math, and I was like, oh my God, this is like another 8-10 years. I'm like, that's like a really long time. So I think for me, at the end of the day, I was just young. naive, didn't really know. I really didn't really think about like the long-term implications of the fact that you could essentially do military service and get out, and you're still relatively young. And so once again, a lot of it is just like, since I didn't have a lot of experience or have somebody that could sort of like, this is where like mentors come into play, right? Like that's why it's often really good for people to get mentors, especially if they want to do something, because I had like nobody to bounce these ideas off of, right? I mean, mind you, I don't know that it would have worked out anyways, but I always look back on it and think what would have been, how different it would have been if I had actually had been able to speak to somebody that could sort of say, okay, no, this is the way you want to look at it. It's still a career. You're going to be able to, continue to go to school and do things. But anyways, long story short is that I did my short period, and I think if you're on your question, I didn't put a lot of thought into why I wanted to join the military. I just joined.
All good, Tony. So I mean, I asked that question because most of the people I have on the show come from traditional finance, or the developer, or just a I shouldn't say vanilla or standard path, but you've gone through a very different path, right? And I could sort of respect that and relate to that. And I think this is what's so beautiful about the NFT space and crypto space in general, is that if you're curious and you're interested, it can ultimately be absolutely life-changing, right? And that's why I think your story, your backstory is just a really great one to hear, and very unique and different as well. So then, and just, I guess, just point about mentors as well. I'm with you on that, right? I sort of lacked a lot of that growing up, and I think you just would have been able to accelerate a lot of decisions had you had mentors along the way, for sure. But then, okay, sorry, we went on a bit of a side tangent there, but I was just curious.
Yeah,
cool. Talk to me a little bit about Bitcoin, because you said you quit the Marine Corps, and then you started helping move money, I guess, within your community. How did you discover Bitcoin? Was that just Googling on the internet at the time, or did you have a friend that sort of told you about it? Like, did you actually read the white paper? Like, how did you wrap your head around it? And then ultimately, did you use Bitcoin to help solve some of those problems you were trying to look for?
Yeah, so I discovered Bitcoin like most people discovered Bitcoin just by basically people talking about it, reading about it occasionally in different areas. This was around the time that Silk Road had already happened. It's like Mt. Gox was going on. I think for me it was more like, well, here's this speculative asset. I'm just gonna figure out a way to buy a little bit just because I'm curious, what it can do. And I like everybody else, I did read the white paper. I would go on to YouTube, or kind of like try to understand more about it. Listen to different personalities on Twitter, on YouTube at the time that were talking about it. Andres Antonopoulos comes to mind in terms of like early people. But and to your question about the white paper, I did attempt to read the white paper. I didn't understand much of it. I think it's very common for a lot of people to say that they read the white paper, but honestly, I got through several pages and understood very little of it, I must admit. So like, I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about here. So
you're not the only one. I was probably the same too. I mean, like a lot of that time, a lot of that stuff at the time was, fairly abstract, and I think I didn't really appreciate what it was until you started experimenting with it, right? Actually transferring stuff, decentralized wallets.
And for me, so I bought Bitcoin. So I set up. I actually looked a while back because I was trying to figure out. So I set up a Coinbase account in 2015, but then didn't do much with it. Like I did a couple things and then just kind of like just didn't do much, right? And then it wasn't until so a little bit back on the type of work that I've always done in Southern California has been mostly around helping people find jobs, kind of find vocational training, kind of like vocational counselor, career counselor for regular jobs, right? It'd be like, okay, what do you know how to do? And you'd be like, oh, I know how to do a little bit of electrical work. And so I'd be like, oh, let me point you to a couple of vocational schools that can teach you how to be an actual electrician. You can either become your own electrician and get a contractor license for electrician, or you can become a union electrician, and here's the pay wages and here's where you live. So that was my kind of job of what I was doing. And I was doing it predominantly in an immigrant community where like the idea would be like, you'd be like, oh, I work as a cabinet maker. And I'd be like, okay, well, why don't you set up your own permanent making shop, right? So rather than working for somebody, why don't you set up your own shop? So I was constantly helping people try to kind of like foster entrepreneurial, I would help people, like I'd walk them through how to get their business license and stuff like that. And so that was kind of what I was doing. And so to me, it was sort of like, I was always curious in tech. I was always looking at technology. I remember when the first iPhone came out, I actually was working for a company at the time, and we used BlackBerries. And I would tell them, I think that this new technology is going to really revolutionize phones, and it's going to kill BlackBerry. And I remember telling people this, and people would laugh at me. They'd be like, "You're crazy." I'm like, "No, but you don't understand how." Because I remember, like, I was always like enamored with technology. Like when the first iPhone came out, I must have spent hours. I ordered the iPhone, and really, I remember spending like hours where I looked at, and I was suddenly like, I just spent like maybe 3 or 4 hours playing with all the features of the phone, trying to understand them. And so I was always curious about technology. And I think that's what sort of allowed me to sort of like take a deep dive into Bitcoin. And even though I love Bitcoin and I like the premise of Bitcoin, where I really fell down the rabbit holes with Ethereum and the whole aspect of smart contracts and the fact that you could, I remember the early videos from the Ethereum Foundation and the DAO, right? The aspect of what the DAO was going to be, and they're still there on YouTube. And I really fell down the rabbit hole with Ethereum, and just sort of like when the ICOs came about, I was like, I have to admit, Maxwell, I probably like did, I don't know, maybe like 20 ICOs, and to me it was just like this fascinating technology. It was like, oh my God, I need to figure out. So I was like working really hard every day to try to make a little bit extra money because I wanted to throw it at a bunch of ICOs, right? Mind you, 99% of those ICOs never did anything, but the few that did actually paid way more than what I put in, right? So for me, it was just like this whole new frontier, and I couldn't get enough of it. I mean, even after the ICO boom and bust, I still walked away with thinking this is some really interesting technology. And I think that what I was so enamored with it that I started attending Ethereum conferences. I had never been a coder, had no idea what programming was. And I'm thinking, I'm going to go to these conferences, not so much because I want to learn how to code, but because a lot of the people that are going to be working on projects are going to be there. And I want to get to know who those people are. So I just started like attending these conferences just out of the blue. I'd like, let me go to this conference. I remember going to 2018. It was Cancun. I think the DevCon conference for Ethereum was in Cancun in 2017. And that was a crazy ride because if you think about it, in 2017, Ethereum was $10 that January. And by that December, it was at $1,400. It's like, it's crazy to think about it. It's like, even today, when I think about it, it's like during the ICO craze, Ethereum went from $10 in January to $1,400 by the end of December. And Bitcoin, if I remember correctly, went from $1,000 in January to $19,000 that year. So once I got bitten by that bug of like, these speculative assets that were doing these crazy stuff with smart contracts, and Bitcoin particularly was, at that time, it was, I believe it was Rootstock that was like exploring the smart contract process for Bitcoin. that was sort of like, that was still like being kind of this kind of being talked about. But yeah, so to answer your question, to me, I was always enamored with, still am, about Ethereum and the possibilities of Ethereum, and so it's kept me heavily into it so much that that was what sort of like kept me focused in learning more. And through focusing and trying to learn more, you discover stuff. If you're constantly reading about stuff, that's how I credit my being able to pick up a obscure Mashable article about these CryptoPunks. It's like, and that's what set me out to like figure out how to claim CryptoPunks, because by that time you could claim CryptoPunks. And so I spent like that summer of June, I spent like countless hours just trying to claim a bunch of CryptoPunks, only because I was enamored with how you could actually send a transaction and get this token. I was like, oh, wait, you can copy and paste a little bit of code and get this token. That was kind of fascinating to me.
I want to unpack that in just in a moment, but can I just ask, what was the ICO period like? Because I know what it was like in the summer of 2020, I think, when COVID hit. I mean, there was the IDO boom, the decentralized, offering sort of boom, but the ICO boom, what was that like? Were you like on Telegram chats? What were the allocations like? Could you easily get into deals? Were they a couple $100 a deal, or how did you sort of find your way through?
So there was everything and everything. We went from like some really great innovative ideas. Like the first ICO that I did was Aragon. They're still around. It's Aragon, which is it's a token around DAOs. And they've gone through various, but that was the first ICO that I did. And then I did other ICOs that did different things, Patientory, which was medical records on the blockchain. By then, that whole year, it was crazy to the point where you got bananas on the blockchain, right? It's like people were actually thinking about doing, putting bananas on the blockchain, right? So it went some crazy. And the only way that I can compare the ICO is that it was a lot like the NFTs, where like there was very little NFTs. Same thing with ICOs. There were a couple ICOs. They got a lot of attention. And then suddenly everything was an ICO. And the same thing with NFTs, right? You had a couple NFTs, then everything was an NFT. But it was crazy. I remember, exactly that. I remember like, hearing about, once again, this ICO, and they had a white paper, and I still have them. I still have them in my office. I have this drawer where every single ICO that I participate in, I actually downloaded the white paper and have it, whether it was Numerai or whatever. I have them, I have a ton of them, and I save them because I think they're kind of like really interesting to just reflect on them, because I would make like little notes of what I thought I understood of the ICO and what it was. And a lot of it, I think for me at the end of the day, was very just speculative aspect. I ended up like, like I said, I ended up participating in a bunch of them. And a bunch of them just, they went south, right? It's like by December, January, pretty much was a bust, right? So like for most of them, you ended up losing money. There was a few that I think made money, but for the most part, most of them just lost money. But it was like, to me, it was at the end of the day, it was like a real, still it was a real education, because the fact that you're reading and trying to understand these white papers kind of gives you an insight to a lot of different processes. And I think despite all that, it was very educational to be able to try to understand what some of these projects were doing. And some of them were probably good ideas, but between a good idea and actual execution, just to be said.
Absolutely. And I think during that time as well, I think the hype cycle was white paper, raise, and then I think everybody was waiting for it to be listed on a major exchange, because that is when they could get their exits. And at that point, if it wasn't going to get listed, it was really hard to get any exits, because back then, if I remember correctly, there wasn't a lot of liquidity for trading pairs to a stable coin. So you always had to go back through Bitcoin on an
Yeah,
exchange.
we didn't have exchange. So that's a good point. We didn't have stablecoins, right? I mean, MakerDAO and DAI came after the crash, right? After the bust of 2017. We didn't get MakerDAO until later on. So most of the liquidity or the exit liquidity, or you would make your gains, and you would. I remember back then everybody was using predominantly Ether Delta, so you'd sell your tokens. You'd go to Ether Delta, find a pair, and by then this was even then you had the CoinGecko, Coin Market, and I remember just being astounded at the fact that there was all these coins popping up. Right, it's like it started off when I was like less than 2,000 coins, and then for a while there I would track them, and every month I'd okay, let me see how many coins there are, and it was crazy. It was like you'd have 2,000, then you had 3,000, then you had 4,000, then you had 10,000, and I don't know what the number is right now, and whatever that number is, it's crazy because oftentimes a lot of coins just disappear, right? So the true number of coins that have been launched is staggering when you really think about it, because a lot of the coins just cease to exist.
Absolutely. It sounds like the NFT collections at the
Same
moment.
Thing. Yeah, absolutely. It's like I remember being very much called out because I went into a space early on when there was Clubhouse, and then later on Twitter came out with Spaces. And I remember when Spaces were started off, I went on and I said, I fear that we are launching so many NFTs that NFTs could go the way of ICOs, where a lot of the NFTs will be worthless over time. And I remember people were like, oh, you're fudding. That was when you're trying to spread fear, uncertainty and doubt. And I'm like, no. I mean, I hope all of them succeed, but I just don't think that they will. Something has to give, right? And
absolutely.
And so I'm not at all surprised that we are in a in the situation that we are now with NFTs.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So all right, so let's maybe bring the conversation back onto CryptoPunks. I think you were talking about you went through CryptoPunks and also found the Mashable article on CryptoPunks. I guess maybe if you could walk us through that sort of journey. How did you find the Mashable article, and what was your sort of journey before you actually found your way to the contract and started minting?
So I found the Mashable article just by reading. So I'm a big reader. I love to read. I spend a lot of time throughout my day reading stuff. It's like so back then I was subscribed to a lot of different tech blogs of sorts. So Mashable is one of them, and I remember just stumbling upon the Mashable article and reading about CryptoPunks, and I'm like, oh, these are cool. And it's like you have these generative art, 24 by 24 pixels on the Ethereum blockchain, and the fact that this art is living on the Ethereum blockchain, and that you could have this token that represents this piece of art was kind of intriguing to me. And so then I basically said, all right, let me see how to do it. And at the time, you needed to use, I believe the article recommended the Mist wallet, which is the Ethereum Foundation's wallet that they were using at the time. It was a smart contract wallet. And I think the other one was to mint through the actual contract, right, from Etherscan. And since I didn't know how to use Etherscan for contract purposes at the time, I figured, and I had already downloaded the Ethereum wallet and the Mist wallet, and I had actually would recommend it to people and help them download it and set up wallets for them. I was kind of trying to evangelize Ethereum. I think that year I was telling anybody that if they downloaded an Ethereum Mist wallet, I'd gift them a full Ethereum just for downloading the wallet. So I was already using it. So I became familiar with it. And so when I figured out, how to sort of claim the punks, because, a lot of people talk about minting punks, but the actual precise language is to claim them, because you didn't mint them. The fact is that you could actually claim a specific punk. I didn't realize it at the time. And I was just I realized that you could claim a particular punk. I didn't bother to. I'm kind of like one of those readers. I don't know about other people, but I'm kind of one of those people that's impatient. I'm like the guy who starts putting together stuff and doesn't read the directions on how to. Doesn't read the installation manual. It's like I'm going to put it together. And so I didn't really understand when I claimed punks that you could claim like really rare ones, right? That there was only 9 aliens and X number of.
So Tony, could you just explain the difference there between claiming and minting?
Yeah. So when the CryptoPunks launched, there was a 10,000 CryptoPunks that got released on the blockchain, right? And so the way it worked is that Larva Labs released their smart contract, and then basically you would take a piece of code. In this case, it was a piece of JSON code. It was like you executed some JSON code, and you basically would put in instructions to claim. It was a claim mechanism, and so you would basically take that code, insert the ID number of the punk that you wanted to claim, and you would basically be able to claim that punk, provided that nobody had already claimed it. So for instance, since I was kind of like trying to figure out how to do it, I sort of went to the website, and then I went and somehow landed on 4700. So then I figured, okay, if I have to change the ID number, rather than going and trying to find specific ones, I'm just going to claim a string, right? So I started 4700, 4701, 4702, 4703. And so all I was doing is copying the code, pasting it, and then I would just change the ID number, and that's the punk that I would claim.
That's crazy.
And so two things, which is really interesting. Two things. I have mad respect for people like Beauty and Punk, and people like Stray Bits, Moxley, who famously claimed. So Moxley's a kind of like a hacker, white hacker, and he's the gentleman who figured out all the rarities and proceeded to claim 7 of the 9 aliens. Wow. Okay, so I was like that guy. I tell people oftentimes I was like that guy who they let loose in a store with a shopping cart and just starts throwing things in the cart because he has like no clue as to he doesn't have the mindset to go and find the most valuable thing within that 30 seconds or 60 seconds that they're going to allot him to go claim like the most expensive thing. I was just like throwing things in the cart, right? So I have like total mad respect for people like two people. One, people like Beauty and Punk and Stray Bits who managed to claim some of the rarest punks. But then also people like Wilcox and Hemba, who at one time had thousands of punks, right? Like Wilcox famously claimed over 1,500 punks, and he claimed them over the same span of time that I did, because what he did is he just figured out they could just send Ethereum transactions. So while I was sending the transaction, waiting for that transaction to clear, to then go ahead and claim another punk, Wilcox figured out, I'm just going to send a bunch of transactions. So he sent thousands of transactions and ended up claiming over 1,500 punks.
Insane. Crazy. So if I get this right for my small brain, so basically in some ways the crypto punks were, whilst they were randomly generated traits, they were almost like pre-minted in some senses, and then you would actually have to go and claim. As opposed to now, when you go and mint, you don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
And so back then you could have understood traits and gone for the most rare ones and cherry picked them if you knew how to do that. Was there a way to do that? Could you visually see the aesthetics of it?
You could see every single punk that was there for the claim. You could see the 10,000 punks and go in and figure out, and the article actually, the instructions from Larva Labs actually even stated it. Like I mentioned, I mean, I'm guilty of just skimming through the article and not really getting all the subtleties And so that's one of the reasons why I have like mad respect for like people like Beauty and the Punk who did take the time to understand, oh wait, there's some like really rare stuff in here. I'm going to go and get the rare stuff rather than just getting as many as I can, and I went in, and because when I claimed my punks, there were still days afterwards that when you look at the blockchain, even I think I looked the other day, and after I claimed my last one, there was still like 3 or 4, maybe even a week or so before all the punks were gone. So people could have gone in on different days and just claimed different punks.
So like, how many punks did you actually claim? Do you remember?
I claimed, I think I claimed like 104. I think I claimed, 104. And remember, because I was taking the time to wait for the transaction to clear. So I would send it in. By then, I also like wasn't like adjusting the gas. I was just like, I just left it for what it was. So I was just like, I'd send it in, it'd wait 2 or 3 minutes, then it would clear, and then I'd send another transaction. So, when you look at it, if it took 3 minutes per transaction and you do 100 transactions, that's 300 minutes.
Yeah.
Not to claim. So when you do the math, you're like, wait, that's like a lot of hours. It's like at 300 minutes, that's a minimum of 5 hours without you, taking a break. Without you saying, I got to go to the restroom or go get something to eat.
Yeah.
I got to get up and stretch. So yeah, so it's kind of
just out of curiosity. Back then, like the performance of Ethereum, how different was it then than now? Was it you literally 3 minutes to process the transaction in the block?
It was 3 minutes because I was using the minimum amount of gas, right? Like I could have upped the gas, but once again, now MetaMask allows you to easily adjust the gas, right? Like I had no understanding of all the mechanics of what I know now. Like now I know, okay, I can do this, I can do that, right? Like, after a while you sort of like learn certain things, but this was amongst like the earliest transactions I was doing that. So I was just trying to do it where I didn't mess anything up, right? I was like, oh, I don't want to waste my time. And
what was the price of Ethereum back then? Do you remember?
So I think Ethereum was maybe like $300 at the most.
That's insane.
Yeah, because I think remember Ethereum was $10 in January of 2017, and by that summer it had gone crazy on a crazy route, and it was like $300, and it would go, it had extreme volatility. I mean, I remember day trading Bitcoin at the time, and I remember like, I think it was my son was in the office one day, and I'm like, hey, mijo, I said, we're gonna sell some Bitcoin because it's got like this mad up. It's like, it's like we bought it for $1,000 and now it's $5,000. So we should sell a few, thinking that we're like mad geniuses, right? So we sell like a few Bitcoin, and then it's just like, it just kept going, right? It's like, I think I remember selling them at like around $5,000 or $6,000. And it was suddenly the things were up at $19,000, by December. But yeah, I think it was crazy times and huge volatility. I remember like, it'd be like some crazy volatility, like you could 25, 30, 50% drops were like normal from one day to the next. It'd be like, oh, so yeah, so it was extreme volatility. I remember like with Bitcoin, it was just like I was just like a mess afterwards. Like, just brain wise, it's like, trying to time it is crazy. It's like, so I just stopped. I think it was the last time I started day trading Bitcoin, because I'd like started off and think, okay, it dropped 30%. Let me see if I can catch it on the way up. And yeah, it was just the amount of energy that took, mental energy, to try to day trade Bitcoin was not very productive. It was kind of
just gone back to the Mashable article at that time as well. Was there a lot of attention on the Mashable article, like, or was it just like a soft whisper? Hey, his CryptoPunks is kind of cool.
I think it made the rounds with a few people. I think it was still early stages where it's just like a bunch of techie and nerds, geeky people trying to understand. Because this was a time when you know, you got to remember that this was also a time where like a lot of the Bitcoin community was being very critical of Ethereum as a whole. Like, you know, it was like,
wow.
yeah, it was just like, it's like, I mean, you know, I remember like friends of mine who were heavy into Bitcoin, just like even laughing at me for doing anything in Ethereum. They're like, what are you doing? It's like, why are you even doing, it's like, you know, like, why are you messing with CryptoKitty coins? You know, it's like, and you know, it's crazy because I remember like, you know, like people, yeah, I think at the time, even though the Mashable article was out, I think a lot of people might have read it and I've heard the story before where people read the article and just didn't give it a second look. They're just like, oh, yeah, it's just like, you know, it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah. I remember, I think it might have been Sean Bonner who just recently collected a punk from me, collected a V1, V2 punk. Okay, that's another story, right? Is the V1, V2s, and we won't get into that right now. But you know, it's like I remember him saying that he read the article, but just never really thought much of it, and never even bothered to claim any punks. And I've heard that story from a lot of people about punks that they might have been aware of them, but just didn't think it was important enough to claim.
Yeah. I just I did speak to Sean last week, so he's on PunkCast as well, but he spoke quite highly of you, and he did tell me about that story on that show, on that episode. But so mate, like it must have been a crazy experience to mint 104 punks and to hold. I think you still have a few of them, right? Like I had a look in. A bit of a
I still hold under two wallets. I still hold about 20. I still hold about 20% of what I minted. So, or what I claimed.
20 on. Yeah. So I guess the question for you, Tony, like, what made you hold for this long, right? Like, if you had people around you telling you, "What are you doing on Ethereum? You're doing some silly stuff." What sort of made you hold on to them for this long?
So I think what allowed me to hold is two things. One, I claimed a lot of those punks on a MacBook that eventually ended up with a corrupted hard drive, and so not only did I not have access to those punks for a while because of that corrupted hard drive, but I also had a Mist wallet that the Mist wallet used key stores. So it's like a private, it's like a seed phrase, but in a key store, it's a file, it's a JSON file. Mm-hmm. And when the hard drive got corrupted, I didn't have access to them. And then even though I was able to, much later, I was able to recover both wallets. But so for the Ethereum Mist wallet, I couldn't. That particular wallet, I couldn't remember the password. So there's still 20 Ethereums stuck in a Mist wallet that I can't remember the password. And for whatever reason, now with MetaMask, the seed phrase is the most important thing. Like you don't need you don't need to remember your password for a wallet as long as you have the seed phrase. And like that was a design flaw within Mist wallet, right? Is that even though I can recover the wallet, I still can't get access to it unless I can remember the password. Mm. So yeah, but I'm sorry, Maxwell, I forgot your question.
So what made you hold for this long? So it
sounds like... yeah, I think sheer dumb luck. The sheer dumb luck that my hard drive got corrupted and I didn't have access to them. Because honestly, I have to think of that. You know, punks didn't really do much for like 3 years. I mean, you could buy CryptoPunks for the first 3 years for $20, $30 a piece, if not less. So, so it wasn't like I had like, it's like even though you could sell 100 punks at say $30 a piece, it wasn't like it was going to be making you any substantial amount of money, right? So it's like, absolutely. I don't think there was a real incentive for me to sort of like figure out a way to recover those wallets and the data on the hard drive, because it wasn't like it was going to make a big impact, right? So I just kept that MacBook aside, and then later on, honestly, the motivating factor for me to recover the hard drive wasn't even the CryptoPunks. I have to admit, it was the fact that it was 20 ETH, and the fact that you use ETH to do transactions. I'm like, oh, I need to recover that 20 ETH, and that was the actual motivation to recover that hard drive. It wasn't even the punks. The fact that I tried to recover that wallet, which once again I never recovered it because of the password. But yeah, I think that's it. So the fact that I held on to them was kind of like, just, that was one of the reasons also why I never went into the Punks Discord, because I think if I had gone into the Punks Discord, I probably wouldn't have I certainly wouldn't have held the Punks for as long as I did. That provided me a huge financial windfall for being able to hold them as long as I did.
Crazy. And so I've just got your CryptoPunk 4786 up now as well. So buck teeth, clown green hair. He looks absolutely amazing. Of all the punks that you had in your collection, why did you settle on 4786 as your primary punk?
So I set on 4786 mostly because he was like one of the more unique punks, even though he wasn't the most valuable punk that I held, because I held a number of other more valuable punks. I really sort of loved 4786 from the beginning because of the green hair, and he reminded me a lot of my dad. My dad was bald and had kind of like bozo, kind of like clownish looking hair that he would just grow. He just let it grow, and he would always wear a cowboy hat. When he took it off, he'd have this lump of hair that just like looked like that. And so to me, it was like, oh, I'm going to keep this punk also because it's very different than me. Also, I mean, a lot of people pick punks that look like them. And so for me, it was kind of like, oh, I'm going to pick a punk that nobody really kind of expects me to look like that. And two, I kind of like I kind of one of those weird people that likes a little bit of anonymity. Like I like the fact that sometimes I can go into a room and nobody knows who I am. So for me, that punk 4786 was kind of like a perfect fit, because even though nobody's going to expect me to walk into a room with green hair and buck teeth, it's kind of cool that punk now represents me, and it's probably the punk that I'll hold forever. So yeah, so it's my choice of punk, and I'm glad I ended up choosing that one.
No, he's cool, and I think you and Token Angels are probably the two that come to mind when it comes to the clown green hair. So it's definitely you've made it your own for sure.
Yeah, Token Angel is another one that's done a lot. Like I credit a lot of people like Token Angel and Pranksky and Nate Alex, Deez. There's a lot of people who did a lot to move the punks to where they're at now, and Token Angel is definitely there. I mean, Token Angel did a lot of trading of a lot of punks and really made the market for a lot of the punks.
Amazing. Out of the CryptoPunks that you minted, like, did you mint any sort of specifically rare traits? Did you get any aliens, apes, or zombies, or anything in that mix?
No, didn't get any aliens, apes, or zombies. I ended up with all humans. I ended up minting a tiara and a couple of hoodies, cowboy hats. I've minted some rare ones. I'm down to one hoodie. I minted, I think, 4 or 5 hoodies, and sort of sold them along the way. I still hold a tiara. And I mean, there's, life is taking some interesting turns, and, as I speak to you, I mentioned to you earlier before we started the show that I, bought a new house, and I credit punks to the ability to buy this dream house that we have now. So to me, I'm also at that. Sean Bonner and I had this discussion where, like, I'm happy to trade punks and sell punks, mostly because I also think that they need to go into new owners' hands. At some point in time, I had the same conversation with Wilcox, where eventually I'm happy to see the distribution of more punks get into new collectors. just because that's what the punks community needs, and so I'll eventually pare down to a handful of punks, and I'm super grateful for everything that punks has done for me in terms of the NFT, and more than anything, the connections that it's allowed me to make with so many people. I mean, I've never. The punk community is just an amazing community, and it's like a community that is global. And I always love traveling and meeting new punks in different distant areas. And it's in the most, to me, it's been one of the most amazing communities that I've ever been involved with.
Amazing. And I think the sentiment's probably shared within the punk community, if I'm honest, Tony. I think, without having sort of spoken to you up until today, on this level, I think when I'm hanging out of the Discord and speaking to other punks, your name pops up quite frequently, just because you've been helpful onboarding them and guiding them along the sort of CryptoPunk journey. And so full credit to you to being, I guess, open and inclusive to people in the space for sure. So I think that's probably why I was super keen to have this conversation with you, because I think just from this conversation alone, it's 55 minutes into the conversation, and I think we could sort of continue talking all day. I could sort of pick your brain on a whole bunch of other things, right? So, but I think if we just go back to I guess the punks a little bit, who would your favorite punk personality be?
Oh God, I have so many. So like I mentioned to you, I mentioned some names earlier. So I'm on various levels. I really love the early personalities within the punk space, right? So you have Hemba, you have Wilcox, you even have Mr. 703. Then you have on the other side of the spectrum, you have the people who collected the rarest ones, and those are the ones that I mentioned to you that I have a lot of deep admiration for, Beauty and the Punk, as well as Stray Bits, particularly Stray Bits, who I've befriended. We've become friends over time. An amazing human being. I really love both of their stories, and I think they're. If you ask me for one favorite, I couldn't mention a favorite, because all of those early CryptoPunk claimers, it's a unique batch, right? There's I think, I'm not sure what the wallets are, but I think there's like no more than 150, 160 wallets that claimed all the CryptoPunks. So it's like a really small number of individuals that actually involve themselves in claiming punks, and also the fact that a good portion of those wallets are inactive. So there's people who claim CryptoPunks that after they claim them never did anything, right? They're just like wallets that have not had interaction with the blockchain in 5 years. So you can consider those to be lost punks. But of the people who are there, I think if you ask me for the favorite ones, there's a lot of favorite ones that are recent, right? There's a lot of new entrants to the CryptoPunk community, like you mentioned, Sean Bonner. There's Ian Rogers from Ledger, who just has acquired his own punk, and there's always new inclusions. But I think as far as favorites, as far as one favorite, I couldn't tell you one favorite, but there are a lot of favorites. Like I mentioned, the punks community is just an amazing community, and a lot of people in it are just amazing people.
They totally are. And then if you were to describe punk culture in a few words, how would you describe that?
I think the punk culture, to me, it's like, I'm not in the Discord or in the Instagram chat as much as I'd like to be. Unfortunately for me, as much as I love to be in there, I'm not in there. But one of the things that I do find with the punk culture is that I've yet to go somewhere and meet a punk that I'm not totally like, wow, this is like some amazing people. Like the punk culture is, to me, like one of the most open, warm, embracing cultures I've ever seen. It's just like, it's almost like I get the sense that you could that if you wanted to, you could probably spend, not that you would, but you could probably spend quite a bit of time couch surfing on punks. You could probably travel the world and couch surf on a number of punks. They're some of the most welcoming people in the community, and that culture to me is, I can't ever see myself not being a part of the punk culture just because of the community that makes part of the people that make up the part of that community.
Absolutely. They definitely have a lot of heart, but maybe that's some additional utility we can add in for everybody, just extra couch surfing on other punk couches.
The punk Airbnb.
And just out of curiosity as well, like, so what do you, when you're not NFTing and cryptoing, like what are you sort of working on and at the moment? Like what are you sort of finding interesting?
So I'm working a lot right now on a DAO. So I've been fortunate to help start a number of DAOs, and I really love DAOs for what the promise that they bring in terms of human coordination. And I'm particularly spending time trying to set up a DAO that's near and dear to me, which is called Paisano DAO. And Paisano DAO is a DAO dedicated to social impact. So it's mostly a DAO for the benefit of the Latino Spanish-speaking community, trying to bring more inclusivity into the blockchain ecosystem by basically helping artists, Black and brown artists, and people of color come into the ecosystem. And that's a DAO that I'm spending quite a bit of time with. And a lot of the activities that I do are sort of related to that, sort of related to trying to do good. So there's a lot of stuff that I do kind of behind the scenes. I would love to be more active on Twitter or Discord, but fortunately I'm not, and that's both good and bad. But for me, I spend a lot of time probably going back to my roots of immigrant activism. I enjoy that. I do that. I would do that. You know, I think I used to joke that I would spend doing time immigrant activism work if I was ever independently wealthy. And so the fact that CryptoPunks kind of gave me that opportunity, I enjoy spending a lot of time trying to, work on causes that are near and dear to me in terms of inclusivity. And so I just enjoy that. And I love what DAOs can do on that front. And I think it's very early still. And a lot of DAOs that can make that impact are barely being formed. And that's okay. But I think that there's a lot of promise in that area, coming down the pike. And so that's pretty much where I focus a lot of attention.
Amazing. And it's great to sort of see you definitely leading that sort of front. It's definitely much needed. I did have a look at that Bloomberg article on CryptoPunks, and I think you were sort of the featured sort of punk that's in there. And I was talking about diversity within the collection and basically the pricing and the demand for punks of different sort of colors at the floor traits, etc. as well. So I think definitely we could use a lot more inclusivity and bringing on, I guess, different races and different backgrounds into the space for sure.
Definitely, yeah. The space has a lot to go, and it's like anything else. It's up to us who can sort of be the catalyst for change to do that, and it'll happen. It'll take time, but I'm optimistic. I tend to be very optimistic about stuff, so I tend to think that most people are good and well intentioned. So to me, I think that change will come about. It'll take time, but I think we will begin to see, and it already is. I mean, if you look at the punks community, it's a very diverse community, and that's one of the things that's very very appealing to me. And when you talk about punk culture, I love the fact that punk culture is becoming increasingly more diverse.
Amazing. Yeah, we are a bit of a mixed bag, but that's what I love about it. And if you could pass on a message to the next owner of your punk, what would you say? What would you say to them?
A message to the owner of my punk? You're talking about 4786, the green-haired punk?
Yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't have a message because I don't ever intend to sell that particular punk. We would probably, at least I wouldn't sell it myself. I mean, probably my when I'm gone, my family and my kids could probably sell it, but I myself wouldn't sell it. So I couldn't have a message for that individual because I don't have any intention to sell them. 4786 particularly. I will probably. We were having a discussion with my wife and one of my sons, and it's like, Dad, at what number? And I'm like, well, we'll probably pare down. I said we'll probably pare down to a few handful of punks. We're fortunate that most of the family members have their own punk, so we'll pare down to a certain number of punks. But yeah, 4786. To answer your question, I wouldn't have a message only because I don't see myself selling them. If my family decides to do that on their own, they might have a message for the owner, but I wouldn't have one.
Amazing. So Tony, this was super fun. I think I could have gone on for another couple of hours just talking punks with you. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join PunkCast. But I guess, are there any sort of final closing comments, and how can sort of people find you?
I can easily be found mostly on Twitter. It's just my full name is just Tony Hererra. It's just, you can find me on Twitter. I'm routinely on some spaces with Paisano DAO. If anybody's interested in hearing them in Spanish, do a lot of that. Looking forward to doing some more stuff with Paisano DAO. For those of you who are at Basel, I'll be at Art Basel on December 1st and 2nd with the DJ and Arcade, which is another project that I'm helping with Jeremy Penn and Daniel Artsofly. And so I'm around. You can commonly see me at events. I tend to be friendly, so please say hi. Stop me. And happy to chat and meet new people. Happy to do that. And I think the only other comment is just try to stay humble and do good. I'm in my old age, I like to think like Socrates and admit that I know nothing. And so when people ask me about, what do you think is going to happen? I'm like, I have no idea. When people ask me about what's going to happen in NFTs, I'm like, I have no clue. And it's kind of fun. The journey and discovery is kind of fun. And so I think my only comment would be like, I make it a daily thing to try to do good throughout the day. And my only comment to people is, same thing, is like, be nice, be humble, be kind, and that'll get you a long way.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tony. I'll definitely love to sort of reconnect with you in real life at one of these events soon. But yeah, thank you again for joining PunkCast.
Thank you for having me. It's been
Excellent.
fun.
And guys, that wraps up another episode of PunkCast for the week. And we'll be back again next week with another punk. Bye for now.